All right, that sounds good. Good. All right. Well, first off, thank you guys for showing up to like the last talk of the day. I know it's kind of late. I'll go through this kind of fast. I won't cut anything out, but I might just go a little faster, just so we can go have some fun earlier. This talk, like the title says, is about digital vengeance, and we will be doing some exploits. I have some exploits for some rats that basically the premise of this talk. I don't feel like these exploits are anything amazing or exciting. Well, I mean, they're exciting, but I don't think they're like, oh, this is novel. I think the biggest takeaway I hope you can get from this talk is that these exploit kits, or the rats that a lot of these actors use, are highly vulnerable, and if anybody's interested in this kind of work, this is a very ripe field for the picking. So if you come away with anything, I hope that's the message that I can share by the end of this talk. A little bit about myself. I've been in the IT or information security world for over 10 years. I work for Symantec right now, but before that I worked for a three-letter agency, and even before that I'd done some time in the trenches. I was an IT administrator, so I know what it's like to try to manage these networks. I feel like I have a kind of a broad perspective on this issue. So with that background, it shouldn't come as a surprise that there are some disclaimers. First off, my opinions or anything I'm voicing up here represents my own opinion and not my current or former employers. Second off, if you go get in trouble with what I'm about to say, don't blame me, right? These can be used for a lot of fun, maybe, but it's probably illegal. And then the last part of this is that, just use it at your own risk. Can backfire. You might get somebody retaliating. You don't know. We don't know really what could happen, right? This is a lot of uncharted territory for the most part. So let me tell you a little bit about what got me started on this topic, and that is the term the sophisticated actor, right? We hear that in the news all the time, that this place was compromised by such and such an actor, or like there's nothing that they could have done. Like there's this one quote by the FBI there. They're like, oh, their defense is, would have got past 90 of us, so don't feel bad. Like, no. This defeatist attitude, like, oh, they were sophisticated. We couldn't defend ourselves against that. That is very demeaning to us as a security industry, and it really bothered me. I mean, I'm not even sure what the term sophisticated actor is trying to persuade, right? Like, you go to your CEO and like, what happened? Oh, we were hacked. Really? How'd they get in? Oh, they were sophisticated. CEO kind of, how do you know they were sophisticated? Well, they were wearing a monocle, so we clearly know that they were sophisticated. It's like, what? This doesn't say anything. It really, it's just one of those terms that people kind of throw out there as a blanket. And so that's kind of the point of this talk. I wanted to show that these sophisticated actors aren't really that sophisticated, and that they could actually be hacked back. So, hacking back, right, is a very hot topic at the moment, and truth is, it's probably going on whether we like it or not. At Black Hat, 5 years ago, they did a survey which showed about 1/3 of the people that they surveyed admitted anonymously that they have engaged in some form of hacking back, right? It's very prevalent, whether or not many say it or not. There was a recent article that came out that said a bank of some sort elicits hacking back. But, nobody wants to come forth and say that they do it. It's just somebody's doing it, and nobody wants to admit to it. Then we bring up Tom Greaves, the senator out of Georgia, has drafted a bill known as the ACDC Act. I love the acronym, which is the Active Cyber Defense Certainty Act, which basically is allowing hacking back. If it were to pass, then that's what the bill is allowing. And people really kind of, the general census is hacking back's probably not a good idea, right? First off, it's illegal, or most likely it's illegal in our current situation. But second off, what can you gain from hacking back? You can't really steal your documents back, right? Like any Hollywood movie star who's had photos leaked knows that. And we should, as IT people, know that you just can't steal something back. You might be able to revenge, that's what everybody's like, oh, we'll get them back. The best you could do is maybe brick their machine and then they go hop on a different one, right? There's not much there that you can really gain. And you have more to lose. First off, if you hit the wrong box, you've got a liability on your case. You might ruin your reputation if it finds out that you were hacking back. Not to mention the lost time that you could have been repairing what was actually hacked in the first place. You're spending off on some escapade that's probably not going to buy you much. And then what if it leads to escalation? What if you do happen to get back into them, but then they catch you and they decide to hack you back again, right? Like this back and forth probably is not going to win you very much. And that's kind of my general thought here, is that revenge hacking is not fruitful and not worth it. But that's not what the ACDC Act is proposing. In fact, the ACDC Act strictly prohibits hacking back for the purpose of destroying or causing physical or financial injury to the attacker. Instead, it says you can hack back for the purpose of establishing attribution or monitoring behavior of an actor. And I work as a security researcher, and so that's where I feel like the strongest use for hacking back is. Attribution is hard, but if you're able to watch or monitor the actor, that can provide a lot of valuable insight to attribution. And so this is where I feel like the best use of hacking back is, not for revenge, as many people feel like is necessary. Now, obviously, you didn't come here to hear me talk about laws or ethics or what I think is right. The talk here is about exploits. So I'm going to step aside from the whole ethics and legal issues and basically say, were that law to pass, this is what we could be capable of doing today. All these exploits that I'm going to discuss just recently got them pushed through Meterpreter or Metasploit. So you can, if you pull down the recent Metasploit image, you have these exploits already, and you can go play with them yourselves. Before I start, I do want to get some terminology clear, because in some worlds I've heard the client piece of a rat and the server piece of a rat used back and forth, and I'm going to try to use the terms in one version and stick to that here so that we don't confuse anybody. The original target or victim from a rat, I'm going to call the target, right? That is the person that was being attacked first. The attacker, the one that has the C2 command and control piece, I'm going to refer to as the adversary in this case. I can't call them the attacker because we're quickly going to become the attacker, and then it gets kind of confusing who's who. They become a victim. And then the term I choose for the person doing the hacking back is retaliator. I really like that one, mainly because it lets me have RAT, which is nice for rats. But retaliator, if you look it up in the dictionary, it's one who returns assault in kind, and that's basically what we're going to be doing here. So I was like, yeah, I like that term. How I started with this is a good friend of mine. He took all the APT reports that have been released, and he just kind of ran some statistics on them, and he tweeted this out a while ago, and this is really what got myself thinking about it. He said, these are the top 10 most referenced tools in all the APT reports, right? So he kind of did a tally and said, these are the ones that come up the most. And so I was like, okay, well, let's just start at the top of that shopping list and work our way down. And so I worked my way, I did 3, and figured, that's good enough. But if you'll notice, the one at the top of that list is Poison Ivy. And truth be known, there's already an exploit for Poison Ivy out there. This one is done by those individuals at the bottom. I'm not going to try to say their name because I would just murder it. But they came up with a remote exploit against the Poison Ivy server. And more interesting, at least to me, was that after Mandiant came out with the APT1 report, a group known as Malware LU noticed that they were using Poison Ivy, and so they attacked APT1 back, broke into their infrastructure, was able to monitor them, they were able to pull tools that they were using, and then they were able to reverse them and find out more information about how this hacker works. This image, the far one on the left, shows the infrastructure they uncovered, and they documented this whole thing and released it out there. This is one of the rare cases where somebody hacked back and then is actually talking about it. And I think it's amazing because what they found provided better signatures for this attacker. It let us know what tools they use, how they do their infrastructure, and kind of what they do behind the scenes. It was very insightful information. So it's kind of actually a good proof that this is very useful information. Another one on that top 10 list that was already popped was Dark Comet. Again, these two found a remote file disclosure vulnerability. I don't know of anybody publicly using this one. I'm sure it is, but nobody's talked about it publicly. But I just had to kind of, fair disclosure, these two had already been popped, so I kind of excluded them from my list. And now, instead of working from the way down, I'm going to talk about them as least interesting to most interesting. So here's the new stuff. Number 4 on the list, or the third one I looked at, is Xtreme Rat. Xtreme Rat, anybody familiar with Xtreme Rat? Yeah, it's not one of the more common ones. It was the bottom one on my list. It's actually targeted more toward a script kiddie type. If you see, so this is the rat command and control piece, and I have one victim there, and I've right-clicked on the victim, and that's the pop-up menu showing me like what I can do to the victim, right? You can see, you can run commands on them, you can take their passwords, you can use them as a proxy, a lot of the basic command and control type things. The script, like I said, this kit is geared towards script kiddies. One of the features in it is it's got built-in games. So if you're bored waiting for your phishing email to come back, you can play some Jewel Quest or something while you're waiting. It's really, I thought that was kind of funny. But just despite this, it has been referenced in a lot of sophisticated actor reports. Shoot, my Gaza Strip there, Israel. A lot of Middle East areas, you see a lot of activity with this kit. So it is used in a lot of these sophisticated actor groups. And easy way to identify Xtreme Rat is how it beacons home. If it does a TCP call home, it always calls home with this string, my version, pipe, and then the version, 3.6, 3.7, 3.8. And the server responds with an X, right? That's a very fingerprintable traffic. If you've got snort or anything, you can fingerprint this and easily detect this type of traffic in this rat. Alternatively, it can try to mask as an HTTP request when it calls home, but it just does this HTTP GET and then it reverts back to a raw TCP section. So it's not even real HTTP. And furthermore, the request takes the form of get some number dot functions. And that number is the passcode that the Xtreme Rat user enters when they start it up. The passcode has to be all numeric, and it can't be longer than 10 digits. So it's always some numbers dot functions. If you see a request for some numbers dot functions, it's probably Xtreme Rat, and you might want to investigate further. So I started looking at this rat, and I started enumerating its capabilities, and I observed how it worked, looking for vulnerabilities. And one of the first things I saw was how it does a remote upload to the target. So when the adversary wants to load a file on the target's machine, it'll send a message and say, hey, get ready to receive my file toolbad.exe, and I want you to save it to this folder named, calc.exe. And then the target responds back, okay, I'm ready to receive your file /toolbad.exe, and then it sends the data. Now, what's interesting here is the target doesn't need to know where the adversary is saving that file locally. Like, I don't need to know what you call it and where you save it. Why are you telling me this information? That was like a little information disclosure, but nothing big. But then I thought, well, the only reason it would really be telling the target is so that when the target responds, it didn't have to keep any state. It didn't have to remember, I've told you to make this request. In fact, it just needs to be ready for the second command. And so that made me think, well, do I even need the first one? What if I just got rid of that and send it this message, say, hey, I'm ready to receive tool.bad. Sure enough, the server responds with, oh, okay, here it is. Here's the file. And so I could ask for whatever file I want, and it will hand it to me. So now I just need to know what do I want to ask for. Now, I can't ask for a directory. That would be nice. But so this is called a blind file retrieval vulnerability, and pen testers are familiar with this. This is something they can come up with. And so this is some suggestions based on a pen tester type thing, right? You want to pull win.ini. That's on any Windows system. It's just kind of a sanity check just to make sure things are working. If you can pull that, then we know things are good. But then after you pull that, you would probably get a good idea of what version of Windows you're running, which can lead you to know where the event files are. So you can pull the event files. Now, if you pull the event files, you might be able to figure out the usernames, right? Because the username usually shows up in an event file by one chance. If you pull the user's desktop.ini, then you can get the names of folders on that person's desktop and files on that person's desktop, which may give you more things you want to start pulling. Alternatively, if they're running as admin, which probably happens more than not, you can pull the SAM backup so you can get their passwords, or you can pull the registry and get a whole lot more information about maybe interesting files. This link at the bottom gives you some kind of ideas of things you can pull with a blind file retrieval. So that was the first one. Second up on my list is Core Plug, or PlugX, or Distore. Anybody familiar with this one? This one's a little more common. It's very popular in Asia. It is, I don't know, everybody in Asia seems to be a sophisticated actor, but this then has been only used by sophisticated actors or APT groups. Again, I have one victim there, and this pop-up window in the front is showing me what capabilities I can do on that victim. It's a little bit more feature-rich. I can edit the registry, do a net capture, I can capture the keyboard, transfer files. Some interesting ones on there was it has functionality for SQL server, so you can regularly access an SQL server on the victim. It's a little bit more feature-rich. It's a very popular one in Asia. It's been around for a number of years, and it's been cited in even more nation-state attacks. Again, a lot of these out of Asia. Some of the better papers that I know you want to unplug me, or I know you want me unplugging plug X. That one was given at Black Hat Asia, and it was a very good talk. They outlined the different variants of this malware family and how it works, and that provided me a good start at where to look for exploits. But this one, as I was looking for exploits, here's my obligatory IDA screen. I have to have one of those in there. This is a section of code when it's getting a packet back from the victim, or excuse me, the target. And basically, it just checks that the packet is small enough to fit in the buffer that it's allocated, and if it's not, then it'll show this error message. However, this particular piece of code that checks that the packet's not too big comes after it's already copied the packet onto the buffer. So it's a little too late at that point. Here you see the mem copies, and then down at the bottom where it says decode packet, that's where it actually does the checking if the header was checking if the size was small enough to fit after it's already done the mem copy. So I thought that was cute. That's nice. And so when you overflow it, you get this very descriptive error message telling the adversary what just happened, right? Like PE decode packet. Very, very clear. Furthermore, this is kind of like a generic error message. It doesn't just happen in this case. Like if you just nmap the server, it will pop one of these messages. This message is just kind of the, I don't know what happened, boss, but something just happened. And so this message is here. Now the bad thing is in the code flow, the adversary has to acknowledge this message in some way. I don't care how. They can hit the X or they can hit the OK button. But as soon as they acknowledge it, then I get code execution. But we have to wait for this annoying little message to traverse its course. So I have a demo of this recorded just in case it didn't work. How I've got this set up, the left side of the screen is the retaliator, and the right side of the screen is the adversary. I've got Metasploit running on the left side there. I'm going to start this up. All right, so I start up the plug X rat at the adversary's machine, and then on the attacker, I'm just going to go ahead and fire up my exploit. This is my exploit for plug X. I just assume I know where it's at. We'll talk more about how you can find out where your adversary's IP is. There's 3 different versions. I'm going to pause this for just a second. There's 3 different versions of plugX out there in the wild, and so I have the 3 versions there under the available targets type. You can try each one and do the check command, and it'll tell you this one looks like it's right, or no, it's not this one. Try a different one. And so it's not going to do any harm to do the check. And so you find the right one before you actually throw your exploit. But that's just a FYI there. So I do a check. Yep, it says this target appears vulnerable. We'll throw our exploit against the server. There's the pop-up message. And as soon as they acknowledge this in some way, you'll see my interpreter session spinning up. I'm taking a second for a minute. I'm going to do a sysinfo just to gain basic info of the target, and then as more as a visual proof, I think I'm going to spawn, I'm going to spawn Notepad there on the victim's machine. There you go. Wrong button. Wrong button. All right. Last on my list is Ghost Rat. Anybody familiar with this one? Yeah. Hands go up. This thing's been around for almost over a decade. It's been around for over 10 years. It was originally written by the CRST hacker team, another Chinese group. This thing is like been the gold standard for rats. Like everybody has, can you do what the Ghost Rat can do? Because that's kind of what everybody's used to. Again, I have one victim, right click, those are the options you have. Very standard set of features there. This one is highly cited. It's been around, like I said, for over 10 years and has been used in a lot of very high-profile attacks. In fact, even most recently, it was used in March. It was being spread by Eternal Blue exploit. So, old bug, or an old tool, but still a go-to favorite for them. It's very easy to spot, despite that. It always calls home with this magic 5-byte ghost and then a compressed buffer. And the ghost is spelt with a 0. Now, a while ago, the source code of this was leaked, and so we start to see variants where they change that magic bytes to try to hide out their code, but they usually leave it as 5 bytes and just change it to some 5 other bytes, which is still a very unique pattern. A good colleague of mine, these are the second page down there is a list of different variants that he's seen in the wild. One of those is 6 characters. The rest of them are all 5-character variants of this. And like I said, it's very easy to spot this guy in the wild. And this guy, very similar to Xtreme Rat, had that same kind of vulnerability where it didn't validate the information that the victim was passing it, the target was passing it. But this one was in the file retrieval. So when the adversary wants to get a file off the victim's site, then it says, hey, I want you to give me your file.doc so I can save it to my repository.doc. And then sure enough, the victim says, okay, here's the data, so you can save it to this path. And we can always, like I said before, leave that first request out and just say, oh, by the way, here's this data. You requested it to be saved in startup. Yeah, here it is. And so, you know, we can do that. And unfortunately, that requires a reboot. And it doesn't always work on Windows, right, because different versions of Windows have different locations for the startup file. So if you know the version of Windows, you could do that. But I wanted something that worked a little better. I had a personal vendetta against Ghost, and so I wanted something better than that. So I noticed another vulnerability, and that is that there's a sideload vulnerability for Ghost. If you set the file oli-debug or oli-dlg in the same directory as Ghost, which is the default when you want to save something, then it will next time Ghost starts up, it will try to load that file. And it's looking for just one exported function in that file known as oli UI busy. It's basically just asking, hey, do you mind if I make the UI busy? And almost always when it calls it, the answer is true. So if you just make a DLL that exports that one function and returns true, then Ghost will load happily, and you can then backdoor the back door, which is really kind of fun. So you can make a DLL, have that one function, put your backdoor in that DLL, and then say, oh, here's oli-dlg, you requested that file, just save it in your local working directory. And it will do that, and then the next time Ghost starts up, you get execution. But that then requires a reboot. So I kept looking. I wanted something better. And I found something, actually. This is 2 lines of code. Since the source code was out there, it made reverse engineering a lot easier. I didn't need to compile it. It was already out there. We see here that they are memsetting a remote drive list. This is listing the drives the remote PC has, so like A, C, D, Z, whatever. They set that to 0, and then they copy into that buffer the buffer they received from the victim, or the target, but you'll notice that they don't check that that buffer is smaller than the buffer they expected. There's only going to be 27 drives, right? So I don't need to check this buffer. It's always going to be less than 1,000. Well, I can make up a lot more drives than 27. And so I overwrite this C++ class. Now, the fields you overwrite is, like you saw earlier, the remote drive list, which is 1,024 characters. So that gives me a huge buffer to write my shellcode in, and then I got to overwrite something below that to get execution. What I chose is one of those images down below. That is a pointer to another class. If you're familiar with exploitation, that means you have a pointer to a pointer that you have to control. It's kind of nasty because then you don't know where you are in memory. So you need a reliable way to end up somewhere. I took the lazy man's approach, and I just did a heap spray, so I knew I was just about everywhere. And then with good probability, I would land in my code execution area. DEP data execution would prevent this attack from working. However, in all of my tests, Ghost Rat server does not even work if DEP is enabled. So I didn't have to defeat that one because the code defeats it for me. Before I showed the demo of that exploit, I do want to talk about some other cool things that I've seen done that are related, and that is Kevin the Hermit has a lot of decoders for the malware. If if you found a piece or if you've been targeted with this malware, then you can take one of these decoders and run it against your malware, and it'll say, oh, this piece of malware was configured to call home to this address. And so you get the C2 information of the target based on the malware sample. Or if you're too lazy or you just don't want to wait until you're targeted, there's always Shodan. Shodan recently added the malware hunter, and Ghost is one of the malware rats that it hunts for. So if you wanted, you could just search Shodan and get it down. And with that, I have a demo here. Again, left side is the retaliator, right side is the attacker. This time I'm going to play it out like I was targeted. So the adversary is I'm going to generate a payload, and I'm going to deliver that to my target. I generate it, and I save it to the desktop, and then I kind of mess up here and close the rat because I don't know why. Now, typically it's delivered via phishing email or whatever watering hole, whatever attack method you want. Here, I just dragged it over out of the VM, and so now I have it down here, and I'm going to run that script by Kevin the Hermit against my sample and extract the C2 information. And there it shows the IP address and the port that the C2 server is listening on, that sample was configured to use. So I'm going to spit up Metasploit, use my module, target my adversary. It'll take me just a minute to do that. Oh, I noticed I wasn't running the rat, so I started that back up too. Just make sure everything looks good. I think I'll do a check. Yep, appears vulnerable, and we'll run the exploit. Now, because I'm doing a heap spray, it's taking a little while to fill up the memory. So it'll take a second to send enough copies of my shellcode over there until I feel comfortable. And then it will throw the exploit. And there it goes, coming right back. I have my session spinning up. I'll do the same kind of thing, do a sysinfo, and then I think wow, the session's taking a second. There it goes. There's the session. Sysinfo, and then I'll spawn, I'll spawn calc. And pop calc. So, we got execution on a number of very high-profile toolkits of these sophisticated actors. And the question is, then what? What do you do? I'm not sure. But I would suggest these are some good commands that might provide some great information. First off being netstat. Netstat will show you all connections on that machine, meaning if they've pwned anybody else, netstat will show the connections inbound from their other victims. So you can see who else was targeted, or maybe if you have other machines in your internal infrastructure that have been exploited. It will also show if there's any RDP connections into the box. Maybe they're not live on this box. Maybe they're just remote connecting into it. Maybe you want to walk the file system, see if they've pulled any files from you or if they pulled any files from any other victims. It will gain very valuable information into what they're looking for, what they're targeting, what are they after. Right? That kind of intel is very valuable to your IT teams and security teams, not just yours, but globally. Maybe you'll want to install your own persistent so you can hang around, maybe install your own keylogger so you can see what they're up to, see what else they like to do, or maybe you want to just rip their credentials and start pivoting through their own network. It's all very interesting. All very, I think this is an area that hasn't really been flushed out, or if it has, the people that have flushed it out aren't talking about it. So I think that's something we should discuss, especially before it becomes illegal to hack back. We ought to talk about what we're going to do when we get on there first. But whatever you decide to do, I highly recommend that it's not revenge, and that it's you lie back and you watch. Right? The quieter we are, the more we can learn about our adversary, and the better prepared we are to evade their attacks. So with that brings me to the end. I appreciate you guys hanging around late on this opening day. If you have questions, I have plenty of times for questions. If you want to go party, I totally understand. But thank you very much. Yes? Yes. So if I understood you correctly, you want to inoculate the victim, the target machine, so that they can't get in initially and then you can attack back when you see that.
But the attack back is automated.
Oh yes, yeah. It would be. I mean, you could easily. A lot of these you can easily to detect the traffic, even if you. I mean, you could inoculate the host. For me, it would be easier, just how I think, to detect the beaconing traffic, and you cut that line and start your own beacon back to home and take control. Yes, it could be very automated.